The Rankin County Jane Doe, identified as Tonya Lee Wills Mullins. On September 6, 1978, in Florence, Mississippi, a woman was found who was around 20 to 25. She was around 110 to 125 pounds. It's noted that one of her lower teeth was twisted behind the other. It was a different time before DNA existed, but I'm not very good at drama in my delivery. I get complaints about it. It just is what it is. But because this bothers me, I try to use someone's life and spin it in a dramatic fashion. I really hate bringing up specific serial cases, especially. And here we go again with Samuel Little. His name comes up again in this case, even if they don't know if it's true. It's noted that it's consistent with what that monster did to nearly 100 women. If someone wants to know more about him, I've got links to some articles in the description below. Instead of putting his picture on the screen, I decided to put a picture of the yet unidentified does. Although it's possible a few of those have been identified since the picture was published. This doe here isn't listed on any of those lists. The young Jane Doe was found beaten and wearing nothing but the blanket she was wrapped in, lying in what was deemed an illegal landfill, described as being located 1 mile south of the Byram Swinging Bridge. The authorities believe the blanket may have come from a motel. Whoever did this is believed to have driven through the bridge seen here and down a dirt road nearby. She'd been there for at least 7 days. They got a few prints, but none matched any known prints on record. They followed all of the leads that they could, but nothing panned out. Likely because she wasn't from the area, though they didn't know that at the time. She finally made her way to the National Database for Missing and Unidentified Persons in April of 2021, but again, nothing happened. DNA was the only option that was left. Thanks to Othram Labs and Carla Davis, things finally changed. I've mentioned Carla at least 4 times before so far, and I've probably missed other cases that she's funded herself, but this is another one. She's listed as a philanthropist, but she's more than that. She's also a genetic genealogist. She's funded and worked many of the cases. She and Othram began working on this case in July of 2022. Thanks to her abilities and the DNA magic of Othram Labs, in March of 2023, they were able to announce that Tonya Wills Mullins once again had her name. She was born in May of 1956 and was just 22 when she disappeared from Potter, Texas. Her obituary says that from an early age, Tonya knew in her heart that her life's purpose was to be a mother, and the 2 daughters that she had were the center of her world and her greatest joy, expressing that the times that she shared with them will forever be cherished by her children who are now adults with children of their own. In the years since she passed, her husband, James Mullins, passed away also. Her mother, Carrie Coffey, too passed away, without ever knowing what happened to Tonya. And the obituary says they are now reunited in heaven, saying that although her mother and husband lived with the uncertainty of her whereabouts for many years, and describing that as a blessing to never have heard the sad news of her passing. Most of the stories list Tonya as going missing from Potter, Texas, which is 800 miles away from where she was found. However, it looks like it's more complicated than that. While initially it looks like she disappeared and reappeared 800 miles away, one of the stories totally contradicts that. It states the young family had moved to Mississippi in hopes of finding employment, something that just didn't happen. One of the girls would say that when it didn't happen, her dad had gone back to Texas to try to find a home for them. The intention was to send for the wife and kids to move back to Texas. But instead, he didn't hear from her. He traveled back. She was gone. And so were his kids. About 3 or 4 months later, without even knowing where his children were, the kids' grandmother would get a call. They could meet at the DFW airport, and the girls' uncle would bring them back to Texas. But if it's known how this came about, it's not specifically stated, and it's really odd. When he brought the girls back, he would tell their father, Tonya's husband, that Tonya would contact him at some point, which obviously didn't happen. A few more months would pass, and the uncle would tell their dad that he saw Tonya get into a car and that she was headed to Mexico. Although if this were true, why not say it originally? Or maybe there's a reason he didn't want anyone to know. Another story was told later that their mom was in Florida. Tonya, had she had the life she deserved, would be not just a grandmother, but a great-grandmother. Her children were just toddlers when their mom disappeared, but they went on to have 5 children of their own, and those 5 kids had 4 more children. Her husband's mother is listed as surviving Tonya, which hopefully implies that a loving support system was left behind for those girls. It's not clear if Uncle Ed, the uncle who had the girls, is the brother or brother-in-law of Tonya, but it's odd that the uncle said what he did and had possession of the girls, though I'm sure there's more to it. If I find any more information, I will post it on the screen here. Anyone with information on this case really needs to call in and let the authorities know what was going on at the time. Even something that seems small and not very meaningful could make all the difference. Tonya's daughter Christy is quoted as saying, "So our family has always said it, that she loved us and adored us, that she would dress us up like we were little baby dolls, and my grandparents absolutely loved her, and that their dad had always known that he wanted to marry Tonya. He knew it when Tonya was just 16. She would say, "Of course my grandmother didn't exactly want that, but my dad was like, I'm doing it one way or another. And of course, back then you could. So my grandmother just accepted it, and the couple was married at 16. Christy Mullins, the other daughter, said, "Really, the only thing I remember is that it's ingrained in my heart how much she loved being my mom, that there was nothing she wouldn't have done for us, and, that's what she did all day, every day, just be a mom." Her other sister, Tammy, would say, "My dad always answered, and he always answered truthfully, if we had questions, but he never said anything negative about my mom, and if you ask me, he loved her until the day that he died. I know he was as heartbroken as we were and are." Tammy and Christy, now 49 and 47, are planning to travel to Mississippi to attend a memorial service for their mother. The coroner, a man named David Ruth, said, "Just to hear the thank you from that family, just to know that those daughters know what happened to their mother, that she didn't just abandon them, that she met fate in a bad way and she could not come back. Saying in closing, that's the most rewarding thing to me." Tonya Wills Mullins would be 66 today if she'd lived the life she deserved. She went unidentified for 44 years. The Staten Island Jane Doe, 1991. Identified as Christine Belusko. In this case, a woman was found on Staten Island, New York, on a vacant lot in September of 1991, although the day found differs from source to source. It was either on the 19th or the 20th of September. She had shoulder-length hair that was curly, as well as brown eyes. She was wearing a black knit dress that had some pink color and pink pockets. She was wearing Tom McCann sneakers in a size 8. She also had on an 18-inch herringbone necklace and a 20-inch gold rope chain. She had a ring with an expandable band that contained a small watch face, and it was black in color. When they examined her, they discovered she had a scorpion tattoo, and this was on the left cheek of her rear end. That seemed to be the best lead, but still no one recognized it. When the authorities arrived, they discovered that someone had taken a hammer to her, and that was the COD, and she's described as still smoldering when the police arrived. So it appears someone used fire to try to avoid identification. She was also noted as being handcuffed. She was identified on March 22, 2023, as a 30-year-old woman named Christine Belusko. She wasn't from terribly far away from New York or from the borough of Staten Island. She was actually missing from Clifton, New Jersey. So while it looks like she's missing from another state, that part of New Jersey is not far away from New York. People travel into the city for work from this New Jersey suburb. There is an incredibly sad element to this case that is included in at least 2 other Doe cases that I can remember. When her identification happened, it came out that she had a 2-year-old daughter named Krista Nicole, or at least she was 2 in 1991, meaning that child would be 33 years old today if she's still alive. The police are now looking for and seeking Krista Nicole. She went missing with her mom, and no one knows where she is. I'm not sure it's even 100% that she was with her mother on the day that it happened. The police would say, "We have already notified the family of her death, and we continue to make all efforts to locate Krista Nicole so we can let her know who her mother was and what had been done to bring justice to this case. So it's a little bit confusing as to whether or not she was with her mom at the time. It sort of implies that she wasn't, and that maybe she'd been adopted or is with a father or some other circumstances. If something else happens before I finalize the video, I'll leave an editor's note. Christine Belusko went unidentified for 31 years. Had she lived, Christine would be 61 today. The DeKalb County Jane Doe, identified as Rebecca Becky Burke. On September 17, 1993, a woman was found behind the Fairfield Inn, which is a hotel in Cobb County, Georgia, located on Ranchwood Drive, near La Vista Road and I-285. They knew very little about her. She had a gold bridge permanently affixed in her mouth and 2 gold crowns. She'd also had a full hip replacement, and they believe this was done to repair a fracture that happened to her left hip. They were thinking she'd been in a pretty major accident, possibly involving a vehicle. Additionally, she had osteoporosis and low bone density, as well as a lack of muscle mass. She had long curly brown hair that was frosted, which is a way of highlighting hair that was popular back in the early 90s. Women would have their hair pulled through a cap with a crochet hook, and then the hair is basically bleached, which, at least in my case, came out to be a lot lighter blonde hair color than caramel highlights of today. And they do seem to be whiter in the pictures, so I suspect it's that case with everybody. Nowadays, we pretty much do caramel highlights. So if you see the frosting in these cases, which it's in quite a few, that's what they're talking about. They didn't know who she was, but they did make clear that her life was possibly taken by Larry Dwayne Hall, who I've mentioned too many times on here. It's believed he's responsible for 45 women or more in the 80s and 90s, coinciding with Civil War memorial reenactments. That's all I'm going to say about him. If anyone's interested, it's Larry Dwayne Hall that you would need to Google. Although this is being mentioned in multiple articles saying that it could have been him, they don't even know for sure. It seems like a lot of these are guesses. They do know that her shirt had been pulled over her head and her jeans were unfastened and unzipped at the waist, although they couldn't prove that an SA happened. They estimated her to be 20 to 40 and around 5'4" to 5'7". It was her DNA that would solve the puzzle, though, on March 22nd, 2023. We know now that her age estimates was off the top portion by 12 years. Becky Burke was 52 when her life was taken. She'd gone missing from Cobb County, Georgia, before ending up in Tucker, Georgia, which is in DeKalb County. They need people to come forward to try to trace her movements. So if anyone knows anything, please call the number on your screen. Rebecca Burke went unidentified for 29 years. Had she lived, she'd be 81 today. The Gatlinburg Jane Doe, identified as Charlotte Roberta Henry. In December of 1974, the Gatlinburg police received a call from the man who went on to state that he and his friends were taking a shortcut back to their chalet in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, when they discovered that someone was laying below the tramway station at the Gatlinburg Ski Lodge. The chief of police would respond and confirm that it's in a really remote location, just east of the tramway, which is generally untraveled by people by foot. So it was lucky she was found at all. She was lying face down on a coat that had been spread there, and they believed she'd been sitting against a tree. She was sent to the county medical examiner for examination, and they would call in the state forensic anthropologist. It appears the woman had been there in that remote location for some time, although I'm not finding an estimate on just how long. The COD was either undisclosed or undetermined. Just based on the comment about her sitting against a tree, it makes me wonder if the conclusion is it was either an accident or a health issue. So whenever it was, goes back to perhaps 1974. It seems like the details are a bit sketchy, in part because anyone who worked on these cases is no longer on the job, and they're often open that not everything was written down. It's hard to know exactly as 50 years had passed. They do note that in January of 1975, which is just a month after she was found, letters were sent to area police agencies requesting assistance to help identify or send information of missing persons. They tried really hard to identify her. They noted that the letters were sent to the FBI, TBI, and the states of South Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia. But in spite of all this, they didn't get any leads that panned out. It would turn out in the end that the state she was from wasn't even on that list. That's the hard thing about this time. They didn't have databases or really good avenues of getting the word out. And Gatlinburg is a vacation destination. In the case of this doe, the case popped up on their radar many times over the years, including in 2007 when they did a composite on what she may have looked like using computer technology. They also added her dental information into NamUs, which is of course the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Then in 2021, after exhausting all other options, they approached Othram Labs in hopes of extracting usable DNA. Up until this point, it was often hard to get successful DNA when remains had been outside for an extended amount of time. Othram Labs worked their magic on her case. They succeeded where others have failed before, and once they got the workup, they did the genealogical search, which took quite a while. In this case, it took over a year. They used the public information and approached people to get leads to other people not in the database. That's why it takes so long. One leads to another. They request a kit, it gets submitted, and then it leads somewhere else on the tree. It eventually led to a woman who shared that her sister Charlotte went missing in August of 1974, leading to the announcement that the Gatlinburg Jane Doe was in fact Charlotte Roberts Henry, born on January 4th, 1939, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, meaning that Charlotte was 35 when she went missing that year. They last saw her at her father's funeral in April of 1974. She had mailed a letter to her family in August of 1974, a letter that they held on to. It listed her return address as 2124 Vinton in Memphis, Tennessee, which is the home seen on the screen right now. This is the extent of the information available at this time. If I find out more before I finalize this video, it'll appear as an editor's note. Charlotte Roberta Henry went unidentified for 48 years. Had she lived, she'd be 83 today. The Atlanta John Doe, October 1989, identified as Orr Pearson. A man was hit by a vehicle in Atlanta, Georgia, on October 6, 1989. They described him as having short, curly black hair, a mustache, brown eyes, and a tattoo of a heart on his left arm. They estimate his age was 18 to 49. I nearly held off on highlighting this case because there's no actual photo of him, but even though they have his name, it shows on NamUs that he's unclaimed, and that bothers me, so that's why I want to include him here. I'll add more if I find more when I go to finalize this video. This identification actually just happened the same week that I'm recording this, so it's possible there'll be more. Orr Pearson went unidentified for 33 years. The Lockport Jane Doe, identified as Webster Fisher. On July 30th, 1980, A box was found in the Chicago greater area, sanitary and shipping canal. Inside was a man, as well as keys and clothing, and these would seemingly indicate that he was some sort of a laborer who likely worked in the area, suggesting he was perhaps a mechanic or a truck driver. The location of the shipping crate was in the canal, about a mile and a half from Division Street in Chicago. The crate had to be removed using heavy equipment as it had become lodged in a grate, and the grate was meant to keep objects from flowing into a power plant. With that crate was other debris that may not have been related. As for the crate itself, the crate broke open at some time while it was in the canal, dumping out its contents. The man was wearing a green pullover t-shirt and wool socks. It stated that he had one dark-colored herringbone house slipper, which is very odd. So mentioned with the other debris, I would say that may not belong to him. He had a lot of keys, including Peterbilt, Briggs, Stratton, and Ford. There was a laundry mark in his pants labeled Jim 5, which is essentially a mark labeling inside of his pants to signify clothing exposed to hazardous chemicals. Further examination showed he had light brown or blonde hair, around 2 inches long, and he was a heavy smoker. They estimated him to be 25 to 35, and they would guess that he was in the water about a week. They believed him to be 5'11" and 175 pounds. That's 180 centimeters and nearly 80 kilograms. They managed even to get fingerprints, but those fingerprints matched no one. He'd been subjected to 4 different GSWs in his abdomen, taking place about a week before he was found. It seems that he wasn't reported missing, and this was considered a high-profile case in surrounding areas. Additionally, in November 2008, Will County Coroner Patrick K. O'Neill created a part-time cold case unit composed of 2 retired police detectives. And the following year, these investigators would send out hair samples of the man found in the crate, sending them to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. But when they got the DNA into the database, like so many of these cases, turned up no hits. It seems incredible that a man who is from the same general area could go missing and not be identified, especially if it's in all the papers. But that's what happened, and the Will County Coroner's Office, partnering with Othram Labs, would crowdfund this case through Othram's fundraising arm, DNA Solves. If you are interested in helping with identification, you can go to either DNA Solves or the DNA Doe Project. Both use crowdfunding to solve these cases. In this case, Othram arrived at his name in March of 2023. Webster Fisher was 29 when he went missing from Chicago, having been born on September 25, 1950. He was found in Lockport, Illinois, which is about 35 miles away from Chicago. That town, Lockport, is considered to be a suburb in the greater Chicago area. Skeletal evidence was sent to Othram, and suitable DNA was extracted and developed. When the announcement was made, the police would make this statement. Obviously, there was a lot of mob-related deaths back in that era, and a lot of that came into Will County. So is that a possibility we'll explore? Yes, it is. Is that something that happened for certain? I don't know. He continued to say this gentleman is somebody's father, somebody's uncle, somebody's brother. And it's nice to be able to give the family some kind of closure, because they're looking and wondering whatever happened to their loved one. The police are now currently working on who took his life. Webster Fisher was unidentified for 43 years. Had he lived, he'd be 72 years old today. The Tift County Jane Doe, identified as Crystal Hendricks. 27-year-old Crystal Hendricks disappeared from Omega, Georgia. The mother of 2 was 8 months pregnant in March of 2013. There are a couple different explanations for what happened, so because I don't know for sure which is true, I'm going to give you both versions. One is that on Friday, March 8th, 2013, Christy didn't pick up her 2 children from school, and it was the kids' school who would report her missing. Another story is that an anonymous caller tipped the police off, although the school was also concerned when she didn't show up. No version tells me what I want to know more than anything, where the 2 kids are now and if they're okay. We do know that it turned out she hadn't spoken to her mother in several years, though by 2016, it was her mom who pushed really hard to keep this story in the news. Then on another Friday, this time August 19th, 2020, the Tift County Sheriff would receive a request to assist in an investigation. They were called out to 456 Urbana Road in Omega, Georgia. This is located in Tift County, and this is where Christy went missing from. Someone had finally found her remains, although her family wouldn't know this yet. The COD isn't listed, nor are the details of who the father was of either of the children or the unborn child. Anyone close to Christy needs to call in what they knew was going on in her life at the time. Not only does she deserve an answer to this, so do 3 children, whether or not the one that was to be born in a month survived. Anyone with information related to this investigation is encouraged to call the Tift County Sheriff's Office or the Sylvester GBI office at 229-777-2080. Crystal Hendricks was missing for 10 years, almost to the day. She was an unidentified Jane Doe for 2. Had she lived, she'd be 37 years old today. If the baby somehow survived, that child would be 10 years old today. The Crane County Jane Doe, 1989, identified as Maria Lujan Rodriguez. Maria was a mother of 3 and was last seen by her family on August 2nd, 1984, in Odessa, Texas, where she lived. Odessa is located in Ector County. Unbeknownst to her family, Maria's remains were found 6 years after she disappeared, in 1990, but not in Ector County, but rather in Crane County, which is located next door. Her DNA was compared to DNA from her sister, and with that, the confirmation finally came in April of 2023. Maria once again had her name, and for her family, finally came the understanding of what happened. Although so far the details have not been released.
We had been looking for her ourselves, and finally we were told where she was. We knew more or less what happened to her, and just all that thought of her being out there and then found and then unidentified. It was very emotional for all of us because we weren't expecting anything like this.
When Rodriguez's body was found in 1990, her family didn't know that she was just a county away.
Maria Faye Lujan Rodriguez was missing for 39 years, and an unidentified Jane Doe for 33. Maria was actually missing for the same number of years that she spent on this earth, 39. Had Maria lived, she'd be 78 years old today and a grandmother of 8. The Maury County Jane Doe, identified as Amanda Newcomb. The Maury County Sheriff received a call in November of 2020 that someone was found in a wooded area off Hood Road in Columbia, Tennessee. Her COD was unknown or couldn't be determined. She was wearing a red and black North Face jacket. It also says shorts or pants. I'm not sure why it doesn't clarify which. She also had on blue boxer briefs, black shoes. She had a cell phone and headphones. They estimated her to be mid to late 20s, all the way up to 40. Unfortunately, there were no missing person reports matching this Jane Doe, and in 2021, they would begin using the process of genetic genealogy to narrow down who she was, finally concluding this was Amanda Newcomb in March of 2023. This was done by Othram Labs. The result was really sad, as it would turn out that Amanda Newcomb went missing from the same area she was found in, Columbia, Tennessee. I saw numerous posts on Facebook where former schoolmates of Amanda's were outraged in finding out that no one reported her missing, although it's not clear who would have reported her missing or if there are extenuating circumstances, which there may be. Amanda had 3 Facebook accounts, several of which were tagged by classmates, and a third used the same photo from one of the other 2. I went back and forth about whether or not I should post this status or even cover this case since it's not as old, but ultimately I decided it might matter, so that's why this status is on the screen. Something was clearly going on, as you can see here by what she states on February 8th, 2018. Because she wasn't reported missing, it's not clear exactly when she went missing, but we know it was that same year in 2018, or if the post had anything to do with what was going on. She wouldn't be found, however, until 2020, and perhaps that's why they couldn't determine the cause, or if maybe she'd harmed herself. The leads were returned to law enforcement. We know that Amanda was 40 when she went missing, having been born on October 31st, 1978, in Columbia, Tennessee. If the photos I'm showing look different than the main ones publicized online, it's because that is a photo that I don't want to use. But rest assured, it's the same person. It's not necessary to show here. I was able to find an obituary that shows Amanda's mother passed in 2017, which is the year before she went missing. I'm unsure she had kids, but her posts on Facebook seem to indicate that she did. She refers to children a lot. Amanda Newcomb was missing for 5 years. She was a Jane Doe for 2. Had she lived, she would be 44 years old today. As always, thank you so much for watching. The current goal for the channel is 20,000 subscribers. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. Thank you so much to everybody commenting. Even with just an emoji, it really has made a big difference. Without it, there isn't a channel, so thank you guys so much. Take care of yourselves and each other.